Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for participating in our added webinar today. My name is Angela Boyle. I'm the Executive Director of the Nursing Institute for Healthcare Design, or NIHD, as we'll refer to it throughout the presentation. First, I wanted to share a little bit about NIHD for those who may not know about us. NIHD has a mission to engage and integrate clinical expertise into the planning and design of healthcare environments. Our members range from architects and interior designers to educators and transition planners to planning and design services within a healthcare system. You may be asking, do I have to be a nurse to be a member? And the answer is no. While approximately 70% of our members are registered nurses, we welcome everyone to join us to help us elevate the clinical perspective in healthcare design. We have a number of partner members from various professional organizations as well as a handful of industry partner members, such as Gary with Paladin Healthcare speaking today. Our members have the opportunity to plan educational content, present webinars, share in our newsletter, contribute and converse with our members in our community forum, and apply for conference scholarships, not to mention gain access to our entire webinar archive. We welcome you all to join our membership as we work to shape the future of healthcare environments through clinical and interprofessional leadership, education, and advocacy. Speaking today, we have one of our industry partners, Paladin Healthcare, presenting how to plan and design for the what-if scenario. This presentation, shared by Paladin Healthcare President Gary Schindel, will discuss how to implement designs from master planning to immediate fixes in both dedicated healthcare and non-traditional care environments, an extremely timely and relevant topic today especially. A few housekeeping items. As you know, there's a huge influx of individuals using services such as Zoom, so we hope there are no glitches here today, but if for some reason your connection is lost, we will be sharing a recording of the webinar with all of you attendees today. All attendees will remain on mute for the duration of the webinar. We will have time for questions at the end. So if you do have a question, please use the Zoom Q&A or the chat feature, and I'll be reading them to our speaker in the last 10 to 15 minutes. This webinar offers EDAC CEUs and AIA CEUs. The EDAC CEU form and course number will be emailed to all attendees for your records following the webinar. We also ask that you complete a short survey linked in that email, and there will be a space to provide your AIA membership number at the bottom of the survey if you require a certificate of completion. So at this time, I'll pass it over to you, Gary. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Angela, and good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. I saw a lot of familiar names on the list, so nice to have you all here. For some of you who may have seen this or a similar presentation last year, it's been updated significantly given the current circumstances. I want to thank Angela and the NIHD for hosting this. We've talked among the board of the HFI as well that I think we have a lot of synergy between the HFI organization and the NIHD, and I think there's a lot of information sharing that we can learn from each other. They representing more the clinical side of healthcare design. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share this with you. Perfunctory AIA stuff. For those of you who don't know my background in giving this presentation, just a real quick refresher. So I'm still certified as an emergency medical technician. I've retired from the fire department, a former paramedic. I spent 40 years in the fire EMS service as a volunteer. I've been involved also from the business side in hundreds of healthcare facility projects around the world for the last 40 years. I'm still certified in hazardous materials operations, tactical combat casualty care, and I'm still a member of the Central Florida Disaster Medical Coalition. In fact, we just got activated last week to go down and man a 250-bed hospital in South Florida. Unfortunately, because of my business obligations, I'm not able to deploy, but I'm still very much in the thick of things from a clinical standpoint. What we'll talk about today is how the A&D community can contribute to managing emergencies, surge populations better than we have. I think there's a whole lot of lessons we've learned just in the last couple of weeks. What emergency preparedness has to do with physical infrastructure, discuss some basic design options that will support effective surge response. I'm just going to skip over a little bit on the CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. Those of you who were there last May at the symposium got the whole hour of that, but if you have not been familiar with that, or if you're not, you haven't done anything with that, there's a separate presentation that I can guide you to for the CP-TED. And then what can we do now? So just to get a context of what we're talking about, mass casualty incident is defined as any situation where the number of injured needing care exceeds the resources available to perform care. Usually we think about this as a gas leak or a structure fire at a nursing home or something along those lines. We've had, active shooters, Las Vegas, Pulse nightclub and stuff, but never did we realize or think that this was going to be in a scale that is as massive today. Again, it can be an unforeseen situation. It can be a chlorine tanker truck on an interstate and putting a chlorine cloud downstream, brush fires, inactive shooters. But it's something which disrupts or shuts down your operations or causes physical or environmental damage. Or it can be any hospital in the U.S. on any given afternoon. And the picture on the upper right, that is one of the New York City hospitals long before COVID-19 came around. That was at 2 p.m. at Kings County Hospital. And in between each curtain, there are 3 patients stacked in between the curtains and then 1 patient out in the hallway. So there are actually 4 patients per about 10-foot cubicle. That's the way a New York City hospital looks every single day. Now you can maybe get a better grasp for why they're so overflowing, because it's this plus everything else that they're hitting on. So, and this happens pretty much across the country in the United States. Or it can be a global new virus. I mean, this kind of blows all our previous conventional thinking out of the water. We're hearing every day of new facilities being occupied and used for mass healthcare delivery. And it'll be interesting to see some of the lessons we learn after this event as to how well that worked. So, by failing, Ben Franklin, being the smart guy that he is, by failing to prepare, that's pretty much what we've done. And what we realized that we've done, we have failed to prepare for this event. We've historically kind of talked about this in the context of hurricanes and earthquakes and some of those more regional events, but never could we have considered something as it's on the scale today. But we really have failed to prepare for a major scale event at any level. Some of the most common misconceptions as to why we don't have preparation is that most people think emergencies are short-lived. The media leaves, and all of a sudden it's not important to most people. The people on the ground, however, have a long duration event, whether it's a tornado going to a hospital in Oklahoma or a wildfire in California. Again, the media leave, but the people there certainly have a long duration event. They don't think it'll ever happen in their backyard. It's the not in my backyard syndrome. It's sad for the people it happened to, but it wasn't here, so it'll never happen. There's a lot of emergencies I can't prepare for. Well, that's not true. There's some basic level of preparedness that should be taken care of because all mass casualties start somewhere and then they scale up. So some basic stuff you can always prepare for. One of the things we'll touch on here a little bit more in detail is what I want to do does not need code. Code is a big obstacle to preparing for surge management. Joint Commission doesn't let us do it. State agencies in Florida, ACA doesn't allow you to do it. There's just a lot of obstacles. And one of the things I really want to urge all of you that through your associations, whether it's NIHD or whether it's through AIA or whether it's Center for Health Design, at some point we need to go to our global agencies, the certifying agencies, the approval agencies, and have a real long discussion with them about what needs to change in our industry to allow hospitals to be better prepared for surge population management, because the stuff's not going away. And preparing takes too much time. Everybody's in meetings, everybody's worried about their HCAP scores, everybody's worrying about reimbursements and all the other stuff. We don't have time to compare or to prepare for mass casualty events. Well, that's not right either. So I did this slide actually just before HFI last year because we did this mass casualty drill here in Central Florida, involved over 40 healthcare facilities, 60 municipal, county, state, and federal agencies, had 1,500 victims, high school kids all made up with moulage. And it covered over 5 counties. And the premise was a coordinated bombing and active shooter assault in Central Florida. In addition, there was a ricin chemical attack with a potential ricin release to the public waterway. And one of the things after the action reports, and I was an evaluator for this, people were saying, why did we practice for this? Because it just doesn't seem realistic to practice. Well, fast forward to Easter, and in Sri Lanka, they had over 100 bombs detonated on an Easter Sunday, and hundreds dead, thousands injured. And it just proved the point that, no, it wasn't in my backyard, but an event like that is certainly possible. And that is what we need to prepare for on a big scale like that. And it's unfortunate, but it is part of our global reality. And then fast forward to 2020, and here we are. The most reactive worldwide healthcare event we've ever seen in our lifetime, and I hope that most we ever do see in our lifetime. So emergency preparedness is the managerial function charged with creating the framework within facilities to communicate, reduce vulnerability, hazards, disasters, etc. It's a vision plan. We all have business continuity plans in our own respective businesses. This is kind of the hospital's business continuity plan. How do we continue to serve patients under extreme conditions? Emergency preparedness seeks to promote safer, less vulnerable communities and facilities with the capacity to cope with hazards and disasters. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is know the risks in your region that you're serving. And a lot of you with the architectural firms, you may be based in Dallas, but you're doing work all over the country. Know the regional risks that they have, whether it's Florida hurricane risk, California earthquake risks, wildfire risks, and talk to your clients about what is the hazard vulnerability assessment. They've all done it. They all have it. They all have risk managers. And, it's probably time on the front end of the master planning to have this dialogue. Number one, I think it'll build your credibility on with your client, the fact that you're thinking about this with them. And then what are the hazard risk assessments? I mean, in the Midwest, you may have a grain elevator that has chemicals in it that may go on fire. In Texas, you've got oil refineries, you've got all sorts of different risk assessments, and they don't have to be necessarily a pandemic or a hurricane. It's just a lot of other things that may cause a mass casualty event in certain communities. Some hazards you just can't be eliminated. This is the ground zero of the tornado that came through Central Florida in 1998. I happen to have been the first one on the scene here with my partner in a brush truck and a commercial light trailer. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, raining sideways. And 6.5 hours later, we had 8 fatalities and 32 critical injured. And there's nothing in your training and there's nothing in your experience that'll prepare you for that. But it is just something, again, in your mindset, how do you manage that? And again, it's compromise. Everything's a compromise. No matter what you do on something like that, when capacity is overburdened by nature, compromise of all of the basics. But the goal of preparing for and training for the worst case scenario is not to eliminate that compromise, but to reduce and manage as much of the risk the caregiver and the patient alike. And that's really the goal, what preparation is supposed to do for mass casualty. If we go to the Maslow hierarchy of needs and we turn it into a healthcare triangle, the primary needs in healthcare are caregiver safety. And that's what we're hearing so much in the news about not having appropriate PPE and not having the staffing and the protection, the clinical accuracy, the testing. Those are the things we're hearing loudest in the news. And those have always been the primary fundamental foundation blocks of a healthcare delivery system. We in the A&D communities kind of got away from that. Secondary priorities are visibility, communication, efficiency, privacy, and then comfort and ease of use at the top. We've had a tendency as an industry to flip this upside down, and we are so worried about the lobby and the common spaces and all of the other things and the comfort areas that sometimes we've forgotten about caregiver safety and workflows and patient throughput. And I think we need to get back to what the primary goals are as we move forward out of this crisis and kind of reevaluate the primary goals of a hospital. We use something called go to Gemba, and Gemba being the Japanese word for Kaizen, for where work takes place. And in a hospital, work takes place at where a patient is. It doesn't matter where the patient is, but that's what a hospital does, is care for patients. And the point of care, that's Gemba. And point of care is not the lobby, it's not the common areas, it's where the caregivers give care. So the goal should be to proactively manage compromise rather than reactively deal with it. So knowing on the front end there's going to be a compromise, what's the best way to lower the risks, especially life safety risks? Because when caregivers are compromised, it further reduces the ability to adequately manage patients. And you're seeing that with all of the doctors and the nurses that have gotten sick through this COVID-19. You're looking at all of the EMS personnel in New York, over 1,000 police officers. All of a sudden, they're getting people out of retirement. I don't know where you all live, but down here, the state has asked everybody who's retired from the first responder community to come back in and go back to work. So they're doing that because we're losing first responders due to the illness and due to the virus. So let's start from the basics. When an emergency exists or a crisis arises in a hospital, every hospital is required to have an emergency operations center. And again, this is something that you may want to start talking with them about the front end of the process of design. The three pictures on the bottom are those at a hospital that I was evaluating that major scale exercise with. They had 6 or 7 chairs there in the conference room and admin. Realistically, there were 14 or 15 people in that room, standing room only the entire time. And it was only one door in, so anytime somebody had to leave, it was always, pardon me, to get out the door. And people were coming and going all the time. They had their vests, they had their paperwork, they really didn't have a lot of functional work surfaces. So plan for an EOC that has room to work, has dedicated computer and UPS electrical circuits, so you're not going to be interrupted. They need to be able to sit down and adequately get in and out of the room with some form of dedicated workflow. Talk about demountable walls and sliding panel walls that create, big rooms out of multiple small rooms. So, but I'll tell you that, the flow of information is compromised when you do not have adequate space for your EOC. So that's one thought. That's where it starts. By the way, keep it close to the emergency room. Don't put EOC on the 5th floor in administration when most of the stuff's happening down in the ER. In this particular case, it was close to the ER and we could send runners because we didn't have communication by radio. Whiteboards, marker boards. Every disaster, every major event needs to be documented from the second it gets called all the way through the duration. And it's something that we can go back and look at and say, okay, at 8:05 a.m., I had how many rooms available? I had how many personnel in my building? At 9:32, I had how many rooms available? How many are call in? Who did we reach? And you go through this whole exercise and you document along the way every time there's a significant milestone through the exercise. How many patients you have in the morgue, how many green, yellow, and red triage patients you have. In this case, we ran out of marker boards. They only had 3 panels. We had to take pictures, erase them, start over. And it was very difficult to document the history of the event without proper documentation. And unless you've got multiple big screens in the room, you may have an electronic scribe that's doing this on a laptop, but it just gives you an overview of the event when you can actually put it in writing and manage it. So think that. Also from an emergency notification, again, this is all stuff and communication starts at master planning. Mass notification of all employees and community partners has to be somehow included from the EOC. Where and how can I get a hold of everybody? The ability to reach by radio. This was a very interesting lesson that we learned because most hospitals work with walkie-talkies from the security people and their maintenance people. But we've installed over time so many CT rooms and lead-lined rooms and ORs and x-rays that, we found out in this particular hospital that our radios didn't work more than a couple of hallways over. In fact, you could not reach the ER, which was 2 hallways over by walkie-talkie. So whenever we needed a status from the ER, we had to send a runner down there to figure out what was going on, and he had to come back. So, you can install in-house repeater systems for 800 watt radios or megahertz radios that we do in the fire truck. So the radio goes to the fire truck has a repeater booster, goes to the tower, and you can get out. So just think about those things, test them before you go into a new hospital. Where are you putting barriers to communication because of lead-lined and elevators and all the other stuff? Redundant call-in features of the internet goes down. If you get a big earthquake and your towers go down, your infrastructure goes down, how are you calling people? Can you call people? and additional information through the employee support system. The big thing we found also is, does overhead paging reach all areas of the facility? I don't know, maybe overhead paging isn't even included anymore in new facility design, but there should be, and there should be adequate that all areas of the hospital can be reached. In our particular case, because we had this ricin release, we had to notify everybody in the hospital not to use drinking water, to only use bottled water. And the best way to do that is with overhead communication. And can the EOC access that, or can the operator actually transfer paging over to the EOC? Again, little things like that go a long way in just being able to communicate effectively. Decon areas in hospitals, most ERs are dedicated with a decon room. Could fit a couple of stretchers, has a drain in the floor, you can shower off, and that's great. But if you get 40 people hitting the door from a radiological, biological, or chemical event, an RBC event, you have a whole different story. Most hospitals have tents that they can pop up, but where are they planned to go? In this particular picture in this hospital, you can see some of the parking lot was dug up by construction going on. So did anybody, before that shovel moved in and they blocked that space off, talk to them about how does that affect their decon plan? Hospital had the tent, hospital had the personnel, but you know, the water runoff, is it going to flow back towards the ER? Are people going to splash around in that water as they get out of their ambulances? You know, so before you start turning dirt on a new project, again, how is that going to affect the disaster plan of that facility? Because it's something you have to have a conversation with. Reclaiming the water is not an issue because they determined that the parts per million dilution in standard decontamination will allow stuff to run back into the waterway. So we're not really worried about putting up dams for the water, but we definitely don't want it running towards the hospital, and check the grade on that. So again, little stuff like that goes a long way. Throughput, or do we park them? And this is a big deal. We learned at Pulse nightclub. Non-critical, non-traditional setting, quickly move through, create room for more critical patients. It's a key element of a mass casualty event. The Pulse nightclub, luckily it happened at 2 in the morning. They did not do hardly any treatment in the ER. They moved them through into the pre-op, post-op areas and other parts of the hospital where they could do the treatment. It, so many people hit the doors so fast and it was unannounced. They were understaffed. They were able to just throughput them. And you know, the picture on the left, you know, there are ways that you can set up critical care stations with proper PPE, proper technology, and completely untraditional stations where you can put wheelchair patients and manage them instead of locking up the ER. The picture on the right was after the one of the hospitals in Las Vegas, after Las Vegas shoot. So, but they had no place to throughput their patients, so it became a logjam. And ultimately, patients wound up moving out into the ambulance ramp and being treated out there. So again, throughput, reunification of family members, right? Everybody after an event is going to come screaming to your hospital and wanting to know where my husband, wife, son, daughter are. Dedicate a route for them to go and a place for them to go as part of that master plan. One of the things right now that is on the big list, and again, everybody's talking about it every day, is the lack of critical care rooms. At some point, and again, Joint Commission does not let us put critical care outlets into a standard patient room. That may need to change. Right now, there are ways of expanding gases non-invasively into patient rooms that can quickly, within minutes, turn a room into a critical care capable environment. You know, and maybe that's the answer. You plan for that, and you deploy those outlets when you need to. But sticking, you know, splitter blocks on top of splitter blocks is just an absolute compromise, and it is not the way to do that. There are better ways to move gases into multiple locations and create a better environment. So again, thinking about what's going to happen and what wing would be designated as ICU overflow would probably be a good thing. So this is just up this morning. Hopefully you can all hear this. And hallway patients, nothing new. Okay, so some hospitals are facing oxygen shortages. That's the message. And this is hot off the press. This is actually this morning. So this is an ABC on their website today. Same thing, hospital shortages, burn through oxygen. Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, I've been there. I've worked with their, in fact, that was their ground zero for the swine flu. and they had the exact same issues then, but they're concerned about the flow of oxygen because when you build thousands of off-site bed locations for patients who need oxygen, they need oxygen tanks. And there's only a fixed amount of oxygen tanks. Most hospitals don't have enough as it is anyway. Ambulances need them as well, and they're burning through it. So how do we figure out to bring oxygen to a non-traditional bed space? There's a brand new technology, got out just in time for this. They are carbon fiber bottles, so the same bottles as we use for air packs in the fire service. I mean, it's a phenomenal technology. It basically replaces an M tank. It can be wall mounted, it can be cart mounted. It can be moved into any space to deliver. It's 3,600 liters of oxygen, and very effectively can deliver high volume oxygen to be filled pretty much the same standard way. The beauty of it is that those bottles weigh 11 pounds, 13 pounds when they're full. Anybody under PPE conditions can take out one bottle, can flip and change bottles so you don't have to interrupt care on a ventilator, and you can swap bottles out. If you have an M cylinder or an H cylinder, which is large capacity cylinders, they need a trolley. They are not portable. They weigh in the 60, 70 pound range when they're full. And now you have to bring maintenance people or other workers into a PPE environment to change out the oxygen tank in these non-traditional spaces. Or if you're doing a tank farm, you've got to run thousands of feet of hose at some point, and you cannot power a ventilator from a hose that's 100 feet long. So again, new technology that's out there and going to help, I think, meet the oxygen demand that we have right now. Again, we talk about safety of the caregiver. Right? These are true life pictures on a hospital deployment, field hospital, a picture on the right. You know, that's a traditional way of right where the patient's head is. You sneeze, cough all over everything, and then they take that monitor, either move it to another bed or leave it there and another patient comes in. You know, that's a lousy way to run a railroad. So having a dedicated place for the devices at the bedside makes a big difference when you're doing alternate care site delivery. And even in the facility, right? In the A&D community, we have to accept that when it hits the fan and when it gets crazy, all of the Corian finishes and the sound acoustics in the ceiling and all of that stuff, you know, goes away when reality comes in. And when you get that patient into the trauma room the day after open house, your trauma room's gonna look like this. And it's the same thing for the non-traditional care area. So, you know, flexibility is key to space planning. So let's talk about the what if scenarios. You know, what if the hospital main lobby would have been designated to become an ER overflow space by design? What if the cafeteria were designed as a walking wounded gathering space where patients could reconnect with the worried loved ones? You know, all of this is possible with situational understanding and with the proper mindset of the front end of the design process, the master planning side. And this is where I think we need to get more comfortable in having this dialogue. You know, access to PPE, again, it's something that you hear in every news report. It's all over. Nurses want PPE, personal protective equipment. It's basic equipment, sharps containers, some basic supplies, the disposable hazardous sharps and waste. The picture on the right is University of Chicago. I took that picture last year. It was about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. Every day they have hallway patients. They even have numbers in their hallway patients. So again, this is why, you know, hallway patients in the ER that you see in the media, that's nothing new. It happens every day at every major medical center in the United States. Joint Commission will never approve that. Maybe they need to. But the biggest thing that's missing in the picture on the right is any personal protective equipment. There are no gloves, there's no masks, there's no sharps container, there's no foam, there's no wipes, there's nothing. They treat these patients every day in an inner city hospital with zero personal protective equipment or just the basics to be able to clean even the railing of the beds between patients. So again, look at what you're doing, bring technology into the hallway. If you're gonna do hallway patients, bring those services in, basic supplies, PPE, some equipment management for the diagnostic instruments. Because the people in the hallway who are going to be there anyway deserve the same level of care that if you're in a patient room, and certainly the staff deserves the same PPE and the protection afforded to them when they're working the patient in the hallway. What if gas outlets were pre-positioned behind artwork in a lobby or in a hallway? You know, again, Joint Commission doesn't recommend this right now, but again, maybe we need to have a conversation about that. That, you know, you can put this behind some artwork, hide them from general view, but when it hits the fan, you can bring a cart or a bed location up here and create a station that is completely out of the ER side. You know, right now, what we're seeing a lot of is the worried well hitting ERs. Everybody who's got a sniffle or a cough thinks they've got COVID-19, and you've got a lot of the worried well. The good news about COVID-19, by the way, feedback from several ER directors I've talked to, is that all the frequent flyers in their ER are going away, and a lot of ERs, New York notwithstanding, their census is actually down because the regulars just aren't coming in there, and so, you know, that's, if you will, a little bit of benefit, but the people who are going there are sick and higher acuity now. But what if we could do this? What if we could take gas services, essential services, and move them into some non-traditional spaces on purpose to help guide and manage patients out of the traditional areas? We talk about wayfinding. So these cones are pretty much a standard of wayfinding in a hospital. In the triage world, green is walking wounded, non-critical. Yellow is, you know, hey, if we don't do something soon, this person's going to go to a red. Red is critical, needs immediate intervention, and black, of course, is dead and going to the morgue. So if you happen to know where these cones are, it's great when you can set them up if an MCI is called. But what happens on the weekend? It's 3 a.m. and nobody knows where the maintenance key is, and these things are locked away. So again, why are we making this a requirement of a staff, especially a nurse, to go find? You know, why can't we look at some alternates? Because the reason this is important is during a high volume event is that there will be ambulances coming from all over the region to a receiving hospital, and they may not be familiar with where the trauma room is, where the exam room is, where CT is. They don't know what the local protocols are in that hospital. Because what they'll do is they'll just go from all over the place and really not know where the hospital, the footprint of the hospital, and how to move their patients. So let's talk about lighting as an aid to directing traffic. You know, what if we would integrate LED lighting into our designs for an ER, that when an emergency hit, all you do is throw a switch, and the green lighting, instead of a path on the floor, and you can actually put it on the floor, right? Everybody in triage goes follow the green light. Everybody in yellow goes to, for moderate severe cases, follow the yellow light. Red goes to critical, and in the black or purple black light for the morgue. But every EMT, every paramedic knows the principles of triage, and when they hit your door, just say, hey, go follow the green light. You know, we've been using lighting for emergencies for a very, very, very long time. It's intuitive. People know it and understand it. Why aren't we putting it into our designs to help guide people during an emergency to appropriate places for staging? I think it's something that we need to start looking at. So ironically, this slide's been around for a long time. Everybody looks at me as like, yeah, that'll never happen, but you know what, sorry, guess what? But we've been asking the question for a long time. What if public venue projects or government facilities were mandated that the facility be designed with a deliberate intent to support a public safety role in time of crisis? There's lots of room. There are loading docks. There are ways for ambulances to get in and out. There's ways for resupply to take place. You know, what if every public arena, such as sports stadiums, convention center, and so on, were pre-planned to stage emergency medical supplies? Or if all of these venues had a medical pre-plan so the patients can be collected, triaged, and managed there. And if we think back to the Ariana Grande Manchester, UK bombing, if they would have had something in place, they could have set up triage and treatment right there. Las Vegas shooting, same thing. And it's already been done. I mean, you know, after Hurricane Katrina, they used the Superdome, and after Hurricane Harvey in Houston, they used the convention center. So it's all been done. It just nobody's taken that to the next step and started planning that deliberately for another event. So now that we've got COVID-19 in our backyard, it's a reality. So moving surge tents, just for you who haven't done this yet, into a public venue takes, first of all, the availability of the manpower to do it. This is a field hospital, 54 beds that we set up every year for the Electric Daisy Carnival here in Orlando. They bring 250,000 people in over 3 days, and it's a drug-fueled, alcohol-fueled festival of the Electric Daisy genre of music. But first, you also have to have the infrastructure to bring this in. So if your roads are compromised, if your power lines are down, if you have a hurricane and you can't get through the roads, or an earthquake, right? You'll never get this to a place that's set up. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of manpower to do this, and a lot of electrical service. So we bring a lot of the power generators with us. So, you know, what if we started planning parking lots, or again, major venues, pre-planning for electrical hookups? This is the tent at Disney at the Epcot parking lot. This is, I worked there for the Florida hospital, was all the medical coverage for the Disney marathons. And, you know, there are multiple tents set up. This is the critical care tent, and the other use the lawn furniture from resorts as beds, but it works. But they set this tent up in the Epcot parking lot, and they treat hundreds and hundreds of patients through here during the course of the weekend, and then they take it down and move it on. So I give you an example of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. The Army is building right now in Germany, a replacement facility, but their parking lot is pre-planned for electrical hookup, water hookup, where they can put a tent up and they don't have to bring in outside generators, outside water sources. It is all predetermined and predefined. So when we do a hospital and there's a parking garage, why not bring electrical services into a parking deck? Why not bring that out into the parking lot so they can put a tent up or a structure or a temporary shelter? Again, these are things that I'm asking we really should start talking about. And it's been done before. After the hurricane went through in Puerto Rico, the disaster medical teams actually set up in the basketball stadium there, because all of the main hospitals were down. There was no healthcare delivery system in Puerto Rico after the hurricane went through. So they actually set up the stadium. The only advantage there was they didn't have to put the roof on their tents, but they were providing the primary medical care for most of Puerto Rico in stadiums throughout Puerto Rico. Again, it's all been done before. So the other what if is, again, a regulatory. What if all hospitals took their expired goods and repurposed them for mass casualty response? The two items here are things out of my personal trauma bag, and you know, that angiocath expired 35 years ago, but if you got to crike somebody with that, or a chest tube, they're pleural compression, it works, right? It's not just because it's expired. The burn dressing, expired 2012, it's still good. The saline bag is still good. An endotracheal tube is still good. In pre-hospital, we manage mass casualty supplies and mobile vehicles. However, they're not set up for long duration events. They're, you know, we can take enough supplies for 200, 300, 400 people to one location. And once that trailer is empty, there's nothing coming behind it. It's it. So, you know, a hospital really needs to look at starting to stash stuff. And again, this goes regulatory agencies, both, you know, local, state, and national, Joint Commission especially, should put in place an immediate waiver for all facilities and first responder agencies regarding expired inventory. An endotracheal tube or a bag of saline expiring last week is not bad next week or next year. We know that pretty much all consumable goods will last easily 5 years in a dry, secure storage, and put it locally, not with the national, whatever they call it, stockpile of things. I have a friend of mine who's the ER director in Massachusetts. He got some N95 masks the other day from the national stockpile. They were 20 years old and they cracked as soon as he started to fit them on his people. The material just, it was that old. So we should not be locally relying on the national stockpile for surge supplies. It just doesn't make any sense because it can't be easily deployed to locations. So again, this is not going to be the last time we have this issue. Terminal cleaning, something else that we haven't given a lot of thought to. What happens when this event is over and we have to decon all of this stuff? Every bed that's in the convention center, every demountable wall that's put up, every partition, what are they going to do with that? Are they just going to burn it? Are they going to try to clean it? When you think about the volume of stuff that's being deployed that is all in a location now that has to be managed at some point through a terminal clean. And again, if you can't paint behind it, you can't clean behind it. Anybody who's doing temporary ICUs right now is just screwing holes in the wall. It's just creating more work and more effort downstream. You know, you should be able to manage technology in a way that you can demount stuff immediately post occupancy, clean it and put it back, or reuse it and repurpose it. The money that's being spent right now on just temporary stuff, it's crazy, crazy, crazy money. And a lot of that's going to go to waste as soon as they figure out what they're going to do after the fact, and it's going to be decom. So think about the terminal clean, think about what happens post-event and how you're going to manage that. Caregivers must defend their case. And again, the National Institute for Healthcare Design, the Nursing Institute, I'm sorry, NIHD, you know, a strong advocacy because it is a clinical-based group, you know, and I hope that they start advocating to support the clinicians that are in this business. The technology exists to create these spaces and manage these patients. Flexibility, adaptability, expandability are the cornerstones to adequate management of certain populations. And we've got to do something about our regulatory agencies, design and architectural firms that have to at some point address the reality of non-traditional areas, because these events really are not going away. Just a real brief overview on the CPTED program. This kind of came out as a genesis from the active shooter side of the equation. The strategy relies upon the ability to influence offender decisions that precede criminal acts. It has been proven that it reduces fear and the incidence of crime and the overall improvement of life. Now, this goes for any building, office building, commercial, doesn't have to be a hospital, but it's a physical guidance of people coming and going from your space using appropriate designed entrances, fence, and landscaping and lighting to direct people where you want them to go rather than just them wandering aimlessly around. Again, kind of the thought process here came around because there was a rather sharp incident of shootings. Same thing with the school shootings, being able to environmentally design a space that controls the access of people into that. The basic 4 components are natural surveillance, opening spaces so you can see who's approaching the building, natural access control through trees, guide people to a primary entrance, territorial reinforcement with bollards and other things you may want to do in front entrance, and then certainly maintenance of cameras and things and lighting. So those are the 4 elements of that. Again, if you're interested in more on that, let me know, and I can direct you to a law enforcement officer who does a really good job on that program. So just as a recap, emergency preparedness in the A&D community, you know, some of the essential elements that you need to look at is work with your design teams during the construction projects. Talk about the what if scenarios. It's obviously this is going to be on everybody's mind for a long time. Identify hazards and risks, assess capabilities and resources, and learn your customers' emergency plans and procedures. It's something that'll benefit all of you at the end when the project's done. Integrate the facility plan with the community plan. Conduct training, attend drills. If they're doing a mass casualty drill and while you're involved in a project, ask them to sit in on it. It's very enlightening when you're there, and they'll be more than happy to have you join on that. So, and then conduct drills and exercise even in your own offices. You know, think outside the box. Again, ask what if, because you know, in 2001, nobody would have thought we would have been where we were at 9/11, and in 2020, nobody would have ever predicted that we are where we are today with the COVID-19. So. That is the official conclusion of our CEU presentation. We're very glad to be partners with you all in this community to kind of further the state of the art, to kind of be a disruptor in some of the regulatory stuff, and hopefully, you know, prepare ourselves if and when the next thing happens to have a little bit less of a downside on that. So thank you very much, and open for questions.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks everyone for attending. I've made a note. If you want to submit questions in the chat feature or the Q&A feature now, I'll be reading those to our speaker. So we'll give you a minute to submit those.
And while you're asking questions or thinking your questions, there is a dedicated COVID-19 surge drop down on our homepage that has a lot of the solutions. It's got information on that high capacity oxygen system, and if you're interested in any of that, you know, feel free to reach out to me. But the technology that's being used to manage a lot of this right now is evolving very, very quickly, and necessity, unfortunately, is the mother of invention.
Okay, first question. What is in place at the national level to start the dialogue about what needs to change based on experience?
I think that's going to change too. The national level has relied, as you're seeing, very, very heavily on the National Guard and the military to provide surge capacity in field hospitals. There's a national system called the DMAT team, which is a federalized disaster assistance team or teams. They have severely cut them back over the last several years. For example, in Florida, we used to have a combined federal and state I think there were 6 teams in Florida, and even with all the hurricanes we get down there, there's only 3 left. So I'm hoping that they will expand the SMART and the DMAT teams in the future. But again, I think that needs to be at local control. I think hospitals need to take responsibility for their own corner of the world and work within their own communities to manage these things. It should not be a federal response because the logistics alone are crazy.
Thanks, Gary. Any other questions? Thanks for that question, Tom. I know it's a lot of information, so I will remind you that in the follow-up survey, there's space for questions. So if you do think of something or you have a specific question for Paladin Healthcare, you're welcome to ask that question in the survey. Gary, are you willing to share these slides with attendees? You will be receiving a recording of this with the slides, but.
Yes, if anybody wants a copy of the presentation, I'd be more than happy to forward that on.
Okay. I will include that in the follow-up as well. Okay, I have a question for you. Do you think after this mass virus event that regulatory agencies will relax their guidelines?
I hope so, but I think to take groups like AA and Center for Health Design and NIHD to lobby them to do that. I hope that hospital administrators, nobody likes Joint Commission anyway, let's face it. But I think if you talk to any nurse, any clinician, they'll tell you that this has to change. How we change it, I'm not in the regulatory loop, but the VA is a really good example. I mean, every VA should have a stockpile of everything that they expire, all the goods that expire, just alone. That is a federal, organization, more than a stroke of a pen to say, hey, you know what, VA is 5 years, don't throw your stuff out. So I don't know. I hope that there's some change, but I really hope that anybody who may be listening here who's involved at the AIA and the national level can start a dialogue with somebody that says we really need a lobby Joint Commission and talk about better solutions.
So I know this question came up last time we did this, so I'll ask, but someone had asked if that individual healthcare system should be responsible for storage of extra supplies, or if it should be stored at the state level or the federal level.
Well, every hospital has its own supply chain, and we've gotten in the hospital business the whole lean process improvement, just-in-time delivery of supplies because they don't want to spend more money than they need, and that's based all on their population projections, and that's all great. But again, what happens during a time like this? They're using supplies that they need anyway in that hospital now to address surge patients. And then all of a sudden, they don't have a strong backup to backfill their daily allotment of IV bags or endotracheal tubes or whatever that it is that they get. So this really needs to start at a local hospital level where they can take ownership of not only their day-to-day supply chain, but also, kind of become hoarders and, they can hoard their expired stuff. We send probably tens of millions of dollars of goods every year to underdeveloped countries of expired stuff. Some people throw them out. Most of them donate them to, Doctors Without Borders and charities and missions around the world. And you know what? A saline bag that goes down to South America somewhere to a poor Caribbean island is welcomed down there. And it's still just as good in a year or two from now than it would be or that it was last week. So that's where it needs to start. I really think it has to start at the local level.
Here's a question. There needs to be a push by the VA and the DoD along with AHA, ASHE, AIA to add this as basic criteria. Who would be best to take this on?
Again, not being in that realm myself, I think that's a question we put to the team here. If somebody has a thought, I mean, you're right. DHA, Defense Health Agency, needs to get on board. You know, where is the Joint Commission in all of this? I haven't heard in all of this COVID-19 since the news started. I've not heard peep from Joint Commission, by the way. I don't know if anybody else has, but they have been absolutely like a hole in the wall here. Nobody from Joint Commission has commented on anything. So maybe, you know, they're somewhere in a war room trying to figure out what they're going to do and realizing that they need to change. But I haven't heard a single peep about anything from Joint Commission. But it's got to be a group effort because we have so many people. You know, we have DoD facilities, and they are recognizing the need. In Landstuhl, I've talked to them. I've been over there. You know, they are preparing. Unfortunately, their preparedness comes because of a need of crisis somewhere in the world that hopefully, you know, will not happen. But they're fully expecting to ramp up and preparing for surge within that facility. And that's an example that every civilian facility going forward should take.
Yeah, and someone commented the American College of Healthcare Architects, or ACHA, would be a better partner than AIA alone. So just to add to your point, you know, a lot of these organizations partner together already. So
no, again, I'm not in the side. But I think that's exactly right. I mean, the folks and the boards of those organizations, you know, should jump together and say, okay, who do we see about this?
Correct. And I know that this morning AIA announced a task force on this. I haven't done too much reading about it, but I will include that article in the follow-up email as well, just so everyone can read it.
That's great.
Yep. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions coming through. So again, I will add a space on the survey for additional questions. Otherwise, Gary's contact information is up on the screen here, and you will hear from me shortly. So if you do have follow-up questions about the Nursing Institute for Healthcare Design, please send them to me as well. So thanks everyone for joining. Excellent brief, great presentation. We're getting feedback, Gary. So thank you for your time again today.
Okay, thank you. And you can find us on LinkedIn and Facebook as well, but LinkedIn is a good resource and put a lot of stuff up in there. So again, thank you all for joining in. I wish you all a very safe sequestration here, and hope you all stay safe out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.